Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Pharma Commercial Insights, How AI and Cloud-Based Platforms are Reinventing Today's Drug Launches. This webinar is sponsored by Infosys. Infosys is a global leader in next-generation digital services and consulting. We enable clients in 46 countries to navigate their digital transformation. With over 3 decades of experience in managing the systems and workings of global enterprises, we expertly steer our clients through their digital journey. We do it by enabling the enterprise with an AI-powered core that helps prioritize the execution of change. We also empower the business with agile digital at scale to deliver unprecedented levels of performance and customer delight. Our always-on learning agenda drives their continuous improvement through building and transferring digital skills, expertise, and ideas for our innovation ecosystem. I'm Sean Edwards from World Congress. I'll be introducing our webinar today. Just a couple of quick announcements before we get started. Due to the number of attendees, participant lines are muted. However, if you'd like to submit a question for our speakers, please do so using the Q&A feature that you see at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer all questions that we have time to address during our program today. Also, please note that the webinar will be recorded. You'll receive an email with a link to the video so that you can view it again. I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Manjul Puri is the Global Head Data and Analytics IT at Genmab. Subhro Mallik is the Senior Vice President, Head, Life Sciences at Infosys. And Jignesh Desai is a Global Technology Leader at AWS. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for being here. Manjul, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you, Sean. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all based on the time zones you may be in. And thank you for giving me the opportunity. And let me go to the next slide here. Okay, we have that. So to start the conversation, right, the way I would like to think about a typical pharma commercial product launch, it's basically you can think of a symphony that needs to be orchestrated very well with a lot of moving parts, a lot of people, cross-functional collaboration, so that once you have the product launch, it works like clockwork. That's a lot of work goes into the preparation of a typical commercial launch, which begins with a tentative PDUFA date from the FDA, which is basically your tentative launch date. And typically your work starts at least a year ago from that launch, based on where you are in terms of your capabilities, your data preparation, your tactics, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper on the data aspects of the launch. So the way this slide is constructed is, it by no means, and just a disclaimer that it does not have all the all possible things that the launch needs to work on, but it does gives you sort of a glimpse on, from a data perspective, what you need to think of. So on the top, sort of those donuts, those are the folks basically who either consume your product, which are your patients, or who are heavily influencers of your product, which are basically HCPs, counts, pairs. And then on the bottom are basically the typical tactics that you would apply, and you would need to wrap around those wheels on the top in terms of how you're going to position your product, how you're going to target your audience, and how you're going to promote your product. So essentially, when you look at HCP and HCO, over time, what has happened is it has heavily gone from, in terms of a purely business-driven initiative, from standing up field forces and making sure they have the rosters in place, making sure they have the call plans in place, to a very data-driven approach. More and more, we are seeing that the business is demanding more and more data in trying to prepare their strategies and tactics in launch preparation. So, for example, in HCPs, right? So you need to have your affiliations, right? Who are they affiliated to? And hierarchies, when you talk about accounts, right? So there are big IDNs in the marketplace. Now we see a lot of IDNs and big health networks in play. And how do you navigate through that? And then in terms of channel preference, that has seen a tremendous shift over time in terms of the channel preferences for HCPs and HCOs. Similarly, for patients, it's very important to identify who your target population is. What is that patient journey? It all starts with what your product is. What is the typical treatment pathway? How does it overlap with the patient journey? How is access being provided? And how are we engaging through patient service, through portals, or through patient support programs, so on and so forth. Same thing goes for around payers in terms of typical plan payer PBM kind of setup. How are you going to influence? And how that landscape is shifting in terms of having a relationship-based or a tier-based models to more data-driven outcome-based models. So in terms of thinking about the sales strategy, I think it all pretty much starts with brand planning. And it's a very important practice to have good playbooks in terms of launch playbooks, and all the cross-functional parties that need to play in that process need to come together and be part of that playbook. And IT in particular, being part of IT, traditionally, I saw that traditionally brand plans were done in isolation, and then at the last minute probably handed over to IT, or not IT not having enough time to react. But now I'm seeing that shift from a positive side where IT is involved more upfront, and rightly so, in order to enable these tactics. So what I want you to kind of tease out of this slide is that it's very important from a playbook perspective, but it's very important for from a launch perspective to have a well-defined playbook, and also keep it alive in terms of as business tactics are changing and evolving, in terms of omni-channel, in terms of channel preferences, in terms of where your influencers or the consumers are. Knowing them, it's very important. So the whole landscape is pretty much shifting in a way from being, in terms of the depth of data that we have, and in terms of where we are shifting in terms of digital. I think there is a big landscape shift, which I will be touching in the next slide. So before I get into the content of this slide, I'm not sure if you've heard of this relatively unknown term called digital transformation. Now, over the years, when I used to discuss these topics in person, in groups and forums, I used to get a lot of different reaction, from excitement to head nods to puzzled looks to heavy sighs. And then fast forward, COVID hit, because it's really confusing pre-COVID era in terms of really trying to tease out how this market is shaping and how digital is influencing the whole change. And post-COVID, we are at a point where that it's very tangible in terms of how digital has changed this ecosystem, and how digital is very, very prevalent in terms of changing behaviors when it comes to your HCPs, your patients or payers, from having, on the left side, you can see fewer resources in terms of your sales rep being that point person for an HCP for most of the information and the learning, whether it's about the product, whether it's some of the promotional materials, to having more digital channels that have flooded the marketplace. And not only that, COVID has really pushed folks to or changing behaviors, I would say, in ways that it is never done before. So if there were reluctance in adopting telehealth or EHRs or patient portals, now post-COVID, it's not only people adopting, they're demanding such solutions. So it's very important to understand that where your folks are in terms of your customers, those are your HCPs and HCOs, and your patients, where they are you present on those channels? That's very important to know, and make sure that we are, as an organizations, those channels are leveraged. And then in terms of whole digital therapeutics area, so when you think about wearables, mobile apps, in terms of medical. There are new terms being coined now, software as a medical device, right? So there are a lot of apps which are very patient focused, or they are SCP focused, and down the line where the industry is heading is towards bringing those together in terms of having those collaboration platforms where patients and HCPs can collaborate. However, there are some barriers in terms of compliance, but I'm sure with the changes in the industry and in the way pandemic has affected the mindset, there is a mindset shift in terms of how we look at these solutions. So essentially what it has done is, in terms of the tactics, your reach and frequency model, your tier-based pricing, focus on historical trends, very much HC focused, has transformed to business now demanding more predictive and prescriptive, like next best action kind of insights, and more payers now focusing on more outcome-based models, which I personally feel is a win-win situation in terms of for the patients as well as for the companies, for the pharma companies, in a sense that the older model would force a formulary to which tier your product would go on, versus if you can prove using data that your product or the newer therapies, let's say in the specialty space or the oncology space, are much better, and you can engage your payer in a dialogue and prove it to them that if that therapy is used as first line of care, so overall it may reduce the visitation to the patients, visits to the hospitals and clinics, and it may overall reduce the total care in terms of the cost. So sorry, I need to go back here. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button here. Okay, anyway, so it's not allowing me to go back, but the whole idea here is that thank you. So the whole idea around this slide is, or the key takeaways on this slide is, that digital has the ability to change behaviors, and it is changing human behaviors in so many different ways. One is it's reducing human interaction. It's reducing face-to-face interaction, and it's reducing, or it's enabling a lot of DIY kind of behaviors. For example, if you go to typically, a grocery store or something, right? My behavior now is I try to go to more like self-service kiosks for checkout. And similarly, those behaviors have changed when you go to airports and you go to self-service kiosks for check-in. So after the initial 1 or 2 times, you may need human help, but once that is overcome, there's no going back. You more and more these behaviors, digital has that power or is pervasive to change and impact those behaviors. So the idea here is, if that is the case and you apply to a pharma commercial landscape, if rep for all these years were your ears and eyes in terms of learning about the patient landscape, in terms of, and also in terms of the account and your HCP landscape, if that window is closing in terms of human interaction, then how do you still learn about them in terms of what they want, when they want it, what's working, what's not working? And so to summarize, if you don't have too much window in terms of or the ability to interact with these folks in person, then the only way to learn about them is through data. That's why when we think of digital devices and data, they're sort of inseparable. So you have to think of both in one sense and have solutions around it so that you could continuously learn about them and adapt and adapt your strategy accordingly. So my next slide there it is, sort of talks about how do you go about making that change. What is that framework in terms of data? If data is so valuable about learning, and that's the only way you can learn about your patients, your peers, your HCPs, HCOs, then how you go about doing that. So to explain this slide, I mean, I think some of these slides, I'm not going to go through each one of them and explain, but I'll use, and I'm sure that you've used the analogy of car multiple times in several discussions to either explain a concept or an idea. So I'll roll with that for this one as well. So when we think about a car, generally what comes to mind? What some may think of as a product, some may think of as the end goal, but it sort of depends on who you ask. The folks who, or the group that manufactures the car is an end product for them, or that's the end goal. The person who drives the car, basically, is the car drivable? Like, can you drive it with the ease? You know, are there enough bells and whistles? Can you take it around? That's the end goal. But if you think about way back when cars were built, or what's the idea, or what was the idea was first floated, the bigger objective was having a way in which people can travel faster and safely in a more flexible way and when they want it. If that is the objective, then if, let's say, when the first car was rolled out, yeah, it can do that. It can go places. It can you know, it's flexible. People can own it. So that solution or that product, you can check the box. Yes, that's done. The second aspect is around the consumer. Is it driving? So you can do a test ride, and with a little training and experience, can you drive the car? The answer is you can drive the car. But then if you peel that onion a little more, did it still meet the objective? But what if I say that, yes, the car is there, the driver is there, but there is no network of roadways, highways, no network of or infrastructure around gas stations and stuff. So how far do you think the car will go? Not too far, right? So it's very important to understand that in order to meet the overall objective of having a mechanism where people can freely move around or drive around, the third aspect of building that ecosystem around the car is very important to meet the objective. So, and it's very important to also differentiate between what a product is and what the goal is, right? So when it comes to business goals, so the whole idea, if you need the product and make sure that it's usable, you also need the ecosystem around it to ensure that the business objective is met. So when you apply that thought process to data analytics solutioning, so essentially what you're seeing on your screen, the left tower is about building your car, the middle tower is about driving the car, and the one on the right is about having that ecosystem around that car so that it drives to meet the business objectives. If any one of those is either missing, chances are you may not meet your business objectives. So I've seen many a times that when it comes to data and analytics initiatives, there's a lot of emphasis on the first two towers around building the car and make sure it's, from a user experience perspective, it's great. And those two are very important. Definitely, those two are big ones. Without that, there is no solution. But the third one, in terms of ops, right? So when you think of having that ecosystem around it, in terms of data ops, model ops, dev ops, Those are the things it's important to make sure that what the solution that you have built will meet the needs or is aligned to the strategy. So what I will summarize is that, or the key theme out of this is, well, you have to have all these pillars in place in terms of data fabric, your platforms and infrastructure, marketplace, engineering, your semantic layers and stuff. Analytics needs the ability of the data science and other analytics team coming together and building models. Operations is key to really make it successful. And the way to align your solution to business strategy is first of all to have a very well-defined digital strategy. Many times organizations may not have a very well-defined strategy around what digital really means to them, right? So essentially that's the first step. As an organization, it's very important to kind of align around what is a digital. Is digital itself is a business model, like the Facebooks of the world, the social media and Googles of the world, or is digital more of an enabler? And once you align on that key vision, then a clear strategy needs to come out of it in terms of, or needs to be derived in terms of what it really means and how you're going to execute on that strategy. And the solutioning of these three pillars needs to align then to that strategy to really make it successful. Because sometimes what happens is, if you don't have all these three pillars, or if one is missing, usually the one on the right, or some of these are half-baked, chances are you may build a Ferrari, but it could be just sitting on your driveway, or it could be just kind of going around in circles. So it's very important to have solutions always aligned to the strategy, because otherwise it could lead to something called as watermelon effect, where each individual towers may check the box, or if in terms of, yes, we did what we needed to do, but it could be green on the outside and red on the inside. So in terms of, if you have solutions, or if you have strategy, or if you have based on where you are in your journey, if you already have certain solutions, and if there is kind of noise around, or there are conversations around it's not working or why it's not working, it could possibly be that you're missing, either one of the towers is missing, or it's not fully baked. So also, I would like to take an example, right? So in terms of ops, this is a relatively newer concept in terms of data analytics, the third tower. I would like to talk a little bit more on that tower itself. So data ops is basically, it's part process and part governance, I would say. So in terms of bringing cross-functional people together who really know about the data, and it will be a mix of business and IT folks who not only understand the daily grind of the data, but as new data is coming in and how it's really changing that landscape. So you can think of data ops as the steering wheel of the car, and that function needs to be enabled within the organization, so that when the car is, to ensure that the car is driven to be in a way that it meets the business goals. The other aspects in terms of model ops is about scaling your analytics so that you have more continuous learning from your models. DevOps is about the nimbleness in terms of time to market when you are building newer functionalities, how fast you can productionize it. And of course, you need to think about security and compliance in terms of data privacy and GDPR aspects as well. So with that, I think that was my last slide, and I would like to turn it over to Subhro for the next part of his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjul. I think that analogy on car was excellent, right? Whereas you have a strategy, you have a plan. I guess our job is to see how we can provide all the digital technologies, the so-called digital transformation that you need to meet your business objectives and goals. So when we started looking at this space, and as Manjul was explaining at Infosys, and we looked at the technology enabler that we need to create for enabling this vision that our clients have, we said, no, we'll focus on a few of our what we call the more emerging, more specialty kind of markets, right? So we picked oncology as the area that we said we wanted to focus on. And fundamentally because oncology, if you look at the life cycle of what's going on, it's a very targeted pipeline, right? You cannot just take one oncology product and hope it works for the entire population. We all know that. It's very precise. It's very close to the precision medicine that we keep talking about. And that's true possibly not only for oncology, but for neurology and cardiology and all these kind of areas. The pipeline has to be very, very targeted. It is targeted on a certain segment of the population, and it needs to move from there. But for you to move from one target to the, as you move from a target perspective to the market perspective, you need to know what kind of biomarkers are there, which potential clients, which potential patients can you use it for, and for that you need a humongous amount of data. But at the same time, unlike maybe many of the other areas which are more established, the competition has become very intense. Today, every company that we talk to, including Manjul's company, which is Genmab, or you pick any other company in the world, they're all getting focused very heavily on oncology and some of the specialty markets. So the competition is intense. And going back to the point which Manjul was mentioning, there is a couple of needs, right? The first need is that you need to be able to differentiate. You need to be able to prove to the payers that your product is better than the others which might come. Obviously, there are first-in-class kind of products which will come out, then that's a different discussion. But fundamentally, you need to be able to prove that your product is better than the others. And then the other important point is you need to be able to channel your marketing spend to the right target audience, right? And last but not the least, the stakeholders are also changing. Okay, whereas the payers have always been the stakeholders, we also are realizing that the patients themselves have become a huge stakeholder in the game, right? There's a lot of internet, there is a ubiquitous data is available on all kinds of disease types. So patients are able to get far more information than what they had in the past. And today payers are looking for much more data before they agree to the payments that the pharma companies may be asking for. So what we felt is that for the pharma companies to engage better and be provide much better support to the patients, they need to understand the patient journey, and at some point be a part of this journey with the patients. So if you look at the first hand or left hand side, the population health, right? This is the beginning of where it goes. We need to understand from a pharma company perspective, what is the target population? From a disease perspective, there is an very important need for pharma companies to understand how some of these diagnoses are happening, because a lot of these disease types, especially in the oncology and specialty areas, are very hard to understand and hard to diagnose. It's only in the recent times that we have been able to find biomarkers. We can look at some cohorts of people and say, okay, this is what these are the patient groups which are more susceptible, or as they progress from a disease progression perspective, that there are specific indicators that they can all look at to say, hey, you know what? This patient is going to move from therapy 1 to therapy 2 to therapy 3. So that's very important for us, for the pharma companies, to understand this part of the disease progression and the transition therapy that happens. If you look at the transition therapy, this is completely based on the real world evidence, the data that they will get from various sources, and they need to be able to interpret that data and make sense out of it and take actions. Going back to the point which Manjul mentioned, if you think of the brands and the brand launch and the brand planning you're doing, you need all this information to have a proper marketing plan, the business strategy that Manjul alluded to, which needs to be built into your plan. And all of them in the world of today is about connected health. So going back to the point that we started off with, have you heard of digital disruption? Well, I guess connected health brings it all together. Connected health is all about how do we take all this data of the population, the disease diagnosis, the disease progression, and the therapy transition, make sense out of it through AI, ML, and all these technologies which are at our disposal today, and then go back to the patients and see how we can help improve the patient lives. So if you look at this slide, the whole journey that a patient goes through is very important for the pharmacos to understand. And this has been the bedrock of how Infosys has been looking at addressing this need and addressing this space. So if you look at it, when we looked at it a little bit in more detail, and this is kind of, I think, where it all comes together. When you think of bringing this whole strategy that the pharmacos will have for helping patients, internally within the commercial organizations, for any brand, we have so many stakeholders. Each one of them stakeholders are playing a different role, and they have different needs, and they have different ways of looking at the data. And that's what they need to focus on, and that's what we need to enable for each one of these personas. So just as an example, right? If you look at the medical directors that we see here, the directors of education that we have on the screen up here, they are looking for KOL information. Well, but the KOL information is very different depending on the disease types you talked about, right? We talked about early on the HCOs and the HCPs was the hierarchy, was the affiliation. They need to understand that so that they can have the targeted messaging being sent to the KOLs. Again, if you think in context of today, the listening ears for this, or the way you will look at this, will be driven completely from a technology perspective. If you look at the directors of consumers, right, what are they looking for? They are fundamentally looking for what is the patient demographics, right? How can I target my campaigns much better? How can I get better return on my investment? Now, this in today's world is no longer about the TV and ads, right? This is going to be much more on the omni-channel, multi-channel kind of experiences. So the way the director of consumer wants to look at the plans for the marketing and the branding is going to be based on the data that they can get from a patient population perspective. Again, something which technology can enable. If you look at the promotions director, well, they are looking at the Salesforce analytics, right? They are looking at Salesforce analytics and trying to figure out what are the best channels so that they can get the biggest ROI on their investments. On a similar vein, if you look at the managed care services part, managed care directors, they have a completely different ball of wax to deal with today. Payers are only going to pay for performance. A lot of them are looking for that. How can they demonstrate back to the payers that the way that the medication is working is going to improve the patient lives much more than what it was earlier? And for them, again, the patient journey, if you go back to the previous slide that I had, that the understanding of the patient journeys becomes very important. And if they can demonstrate the efficacy of their product, it's all the more easier to go and have a conversation with the payers. And last but not the least, the directors of the multi-channels, right? So for them, the point is which of the channels will drive a better promotion for their products. Like who are the early adopters, who can take their product and make it successful and then go and talk about it in the various user forums that get created. A lot of these specialty products that you have, whether it's in oncology or cardiology or the neurology as the case may be, they will have their specific forums where patients share their experiences, talk about the new kind of medications that are coming up. So from a multi-channel perspective, this becomes the more very critical point for them to look at it. And each of them is based on ROIs, and each of them is based on what they can afford in the context of each one of their responsibilities. But if you again bring it all together in context of a brand today, this is a easy thing to put on a chart, but very difficult when you look at it from a holistic business process perspective. And I think that is the key building block of what we at Infosys are trying to do through this CIP platform that we have, right? The Commercial Insights platform that we have launched. The Commercial Insight platforms comes with four building blocks. There's an innovation and incubation capability, there's a data integration capability, and which is backed by our domain understanding and the cross-industry experience that we bring to bear. So let me talk a little bit about the innovation and incubation capabilities. What we are talking about here is, if you think of a Commercial Insights platform that you have enabled, bringing together all the brand personas that you have for one drug, can you take it and industrialize it for the rest of the brands across let's say the one company that we work for, any company X? What we have seen in the past is that if you can do for one brand, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can do it for the other brand, because there's a whole intent to reinvent the wheel. But what we have accomplished is we have templatized lot of these personas, lot of the data integration into our platform itself, right? So that you can take it and make it run at for one product, and then kind of move it along for all the rest of the products that are there within your organization. So the ability to rapidly take this data that is coming from one brand, the enablement that you have done for one brand into other brands is much better on our platform. If you look at it from a data and technology perspective, which is again, I would say the core of it all, it has fundamentally a couple of things. The first thing that it has inherently built into it is the pre-built data templates, which allows us to get data from both internal and external sources. As an example, we can get the sales data from IQVIA or Symphony or Prometrics. We can get the comparative data from, again, the IQVIAs of the world, and also the real world data from the various lab data that we can get. Then we have the ability to integrate the various internal data sources, be it from a segment or a brand perspective, which is what you would have seen on Manjul's first slide, or the hierarchy and affiliations, which becomes very important, inherently being integrated into this one platform, right? So you have the hierarchy and affiliation information also being made available on these platforms. So first of all, what we are able to do is to aggregate this data from various sources into one common platform. At the same time, on top of this, what we are building is the ability to provide insights back to our back to the various personas, which I talked about in the previous slide, right? So we looked at the director for promotions, we looked at the director for multi-channel. What comes inherently in this platform is these personas, which have already got the KPIs and the kind of reports that they will be looking for pre-built into our platform, right? So when you have a brand, all you get into it is you rapidly have these KPIs and dashboards available to you, and then each persona can log into it and log into this platform and get the kind of reports that they might be looking for in their context, right? So that creates an ability to accelerate the innovation that I talked about on the earlier slide. If you look at it from a technology perspective, it is a very modular platform. We are able to build modules because what we realize is in working with large pharmacos and small and large and mid-sized pharmacos, their needs are very different. Some smaller pharmacos, maybe the entire platform in its entirety can work. But in many large pharmacos, which have a lot of legacy systems, they need the ability to integrate the data and take certain modules from us, but then keep it together from their perspective. So we have the ability to be a modular to a great extent. This has been built on a cloud platform. You will have Jignesh from AWS talking about what we have been doing with them. So it's been built on a cloud platform. So it gives a lot of flexibility and speed to market in terms of deployment. And last but not the least, what we have injected into this is our digital brain. So our digital brain is all about the AI and the ML capabilities and the deep learning capabilities that we have injected into it. What it does for us, it can look at multiple sources of data, it can look at hidden data, and then bring it all together from a analytics and insights perspective so that we can make sense out of this data. So the platform that we have built can now bring together all the four things that we talked about, right? It has the ability to detect disease detection and diagnose it, provide some insights around that, looks at the therapy transitions that are happening. That is what we talked about in our initial slides, and provide some insights back to the sales team, back to the brand teams to look at how therapy transitions are happening and hence target their campaigns accordingly to the HCPs or the HCOs. Build a much better patient adherence plan. So inherent to the platform, we are also giving you the ability to bring in a patient engagement platform, which will allow the patients to work better with us. So essentially, we'll be able to take the digital biomarker data from all the patients and then provide the information back along with the treatment regime that might have been prescribed by the HCPs, right? So we can kind of marry the two together and say, hey, this is what the patient profile is looking like from an adherence perspective, not just the treatment, but maybe the exercise or health or the food, everything else that comes along with it. And finally, how we can able to also bring down the waste in the process, because what we are doing through our AI ML capabilities that we are injecting into this platform is to bring together the noise remove all the noise that's out there and bring it together for our end users to look at it, right? The brand managers, etc., to look at it and say, hey, this is how you can run the platform so that the overall platform is very efficient. But more importantly, you are able to refocus your energies on things that are most important. To sum it all up, from our perspective, this platform provides you the ability to bring together the entire life cycle of oncology to begin with from a technology perspective, and yet and at the same time, give you the insights that you need so that you can take a lot of actions from a client perspective. So with that, I'll turn this over to Jignesh to talk a little bit more about what we are doing from an AWS perspective. Jignesh, over to you.
Thanks, Subhro. So before I start, let me thank you, Subhro and Manjul, to give me an opportunity to talk about it. And I'll dive deep a little bit onto how we build this platform together. So you will learn about what are the components that went into it and how we build the solution, how we gel it together with AWS and Infosys. So let me talk a little bit about, how the platform works, right? So first of all, in most recent report, Gartner, analyst report says AWS is most mature enterprise-ready provider with the strongest track record for customer success and the most, useful partner ecosystem. And that comes as a, very big deal for us as in AWS and providing the partners to build this kind of solutions on top of the infrastructure, which is kind of capable of building with the most secure, right? So AWS has been continuously expanding its services to support virtually and any cloud workloads. And it has more than 200 fully featured services for compute, storage, database, networking, analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. And these services also provide, support with more than 400 types of compute instances, which is provided on AWS. And that's where, the real meat is. That's where the platforms like CIP thrives on the infrastructure. Now, first of all, security is job zero at AWS. So all the data that customer puts onto the AWS cloud, AWS have no access towards it. Customer provides the security, customer provides the control towards it, and only the customer can access it. On top of that, we have more than 100 services which is HIPAA eligible. Plus, it will help platform like this to comply with GXP, HIPAA, HIPTrust, GDPR standards, right? And this comes in with the comprehensive list, right? So these compliances could be easily available for view for customers by using AWS Artifact as a service. It's very easily available to download and use it. Now, as if I talk a little bit more about the solutions itself, right? So life science enterprises solution has taken a front seat within AWS, and we are focusing a lot more with all this, going around the world, all the pandemic going around the world. These solutions have taken a front seat, and AWS is working jointly with Infosys to create those solutions. And we have a deepest partner network to build those solutions. And let me focus a little bit on, what we are building together. So there are 5 sets of, components that goes into any drug discovery. And all 5 sets of stages, we are working with Infosys to build solutions on top of this infrastructure. CIP is just one example of it. We are also working with Infosys to build, comprehensive, medical reports and whatnot using AWS Comprehend. So to dive a little bit deeper, right? So for research and discovery, we need the platform which is agile, which can store a vast amount of customer data, and the clinical trial support system. And that's where, the real, the invention of drugs, the innovation comes into the play. Then comes in for the clinical development. So at this stage, there are a lot of information that goes in, and we are working with Infosys to enhance this platform for, working more on providing the data insights, which Manjul talked about is very good car analogy, right? Where if you build a car, but if it isn't run, that there is no point of, building the car itself, right? So that's where this platform comes into play. after the solution has been built, there is also a effective management in manufacturing and supply chain. If those insights are missing, then there is no way to effectively mobilize the drug, right? So this platform would also help creating the entire ecosystem, which will help give you the insights on logistics and also supply chain. Finally, the commercials, right? How the sales are happening. What are my territories where, the drugs are doing very well? Those kind of insights are also equally important to, create that. And that's where, this platform will also help you. And finally, the post-market, surveillance patient report. And that's where the efficacy of a drug, how it's been performing, which groups have been performing well, or what kind of, ethnicities are susceptible to it. That kind of insights are also generated. So in and all, if you look at, in a nutshell, this platform and this solution will provide you the overall view of creating the pharma insights, and the companies could do that. Now, Subhro has pointed out a very good point. One thing is creating one solution that will be catered for one customer. So creating a template with all these 5 fundamental systems together is really important. And that's where we have joined hands together to solve the problems for our pharma industries, to create that insights platform which can give all the 5 angles rather than just targeting 1 or 2 areas. So with that, let me go on the next slide to focus on the customer case study that we are working together. So there is a German life science customer which we are working together to launch this platform. We are helping them with insights of the newer drug they are finding out. Plus, we are also working with the leading digital health company where we are also providing the respiratory devices and how those devices would be mobilized or logistically used. And that is where this platform will be helpful. If you focus a little bit more, one is creating, it's a life science giant. The second is a digital health company. So 2 different customer, 2 different use cases. The solution itself is the same. So look at the differences, but the platform itself will gonna come together and give you insights on the drug or the digital devices that's gonna be using the platform. So finally, how did we do it, right? What are the services we used? How did we build it? So from left to right, I want to kind of divert your attention to the architecture here. And this is a very abstract view of how we built it together. Once we dive deep, we have done a lot of work, building those models, creating those insights, using the right instance sizes and whatnot. So from left to right, let me just walk you through the entire architecture. So on the left side, you see the external sources, right? You have sales from IQVIA, you have claims from Symphony Health, you have inventory from McKesson, and you have CRM for Viva. Look at different providers who provide different kind of data that could be useful for one customer to create that insights. So what we did is, and plus we also are using AWS Data Exchange, which is providing, clinical trials data and other data to improve drugs eventually, right? So on the left side, you see all this data is flowing through to AWS using AWS Transfer Family. We use AWS as Managed SFTP service to load all that data into Amazon S3. Amazon S3 is our service which is, provides the 13 nines of reliability and provides a default security standards. And customer could also manage their own security using AWS KMS or encrypt the data while it's loading into Amazon S3. So all that data, once that has been loaded onto Amazon S3, we call it as a raw data format. And a lot of data lakes were built on S3, and this raw data is still insightful even before the data is massaged and created with tables and whatnot. So what we did on Amazon S3, we created a routine which can go in and checks the validity of data, whether the data is correct or not, because we have to also make sure when these many sources of data getting loaded into S3, making sure that there is no junk data coming. There is no, there is no garbage data coming. Otherwise, the data lake quickly becomes a data swamp, right? We don't want to do that. Then, so with the use of that, with the use of right orchestration and the validation in place, we load that data onto Amazon Redshift. Amazon Redshift is our data warehousing service. Customers can load petabyte scale of data onto Amazon Redshift and create, insights on top of it. Once the data loaded into Redshift, the creating analytics on top of it, it becomes really, really easy. So what we are following is two standards. So once the data is there, we are evolving with the lakehouse architecture where data is directly queryable from Amazon S3 itself, right? So basically, the way it's been done is the Redshift Spectrum picks it up, and then you can directly query the data on Amazon S3. All the data has been massaged and then loaded into Amazon Redshift. Then, the template that Subhro was talking about, that kicks in, and that template uses it's a rinse and repeat template, and that's how we hydrate our insightful tables on top of it. Now, the engine that goes behind uses AWS Lambda, step functions, and Glue catalog to not only the catalog data, but also creating, the ETL jobs and whatnot to create those, a targeted data set, which eventually resides on Amazon Redshift. Now, this will help reduce a cost for a customer a lot, because Amazon S3 cost versus Amazon Redshift cost, right? So you have to make sure that not a lot of, only the insightful data goes into Amazon Redshift. And then, because when you query it, it's going to be quickly creating those insights on top of that. Now, once the data has been loaded onto Redshift, we create a data mart, what we call it a data mart. And on the top of data mart, we created, reporting and insights and whatnot. We support Amazon QuickSight or Tableau or any kind of BI or empowering tool which customer have to create insights on top of it. At the bottom, you look at the security controls that we have put into place. We have IAM, which can, make sure that there is least privilege, like not every data is available to, every employee or every, data scientist that's working on it. We have a cloud trail, which kind of, completely creates the trail of things that we have created. If anybody touches any table or any of that sort, that trail is completely done, so that, if there is a security audit, we can definitely talk about that. And then all this, platform is built under VPC, which is not exposed to an internet. Everything is built inside the private subnet, so that it doesn't, it doesn't expose, the risk of losing data to the external internet. And finally, we use AWS KMS to encrypt all the data and then, provide that insightful reports to our customer. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sean for next step.
Great, thank you. So the first question we have, Manjul, what do you think are the primary challenges in identifying what data sets are suitable for your brand or specialty drug?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think what I've seen is over the years, the industry is shifting from the syndicated cuts of data to more patient data. There is a lot more offering in the industry when it comes to patient claims, the kind of cuts you have, the frequency, diagnostics data. So it's very valuable data when it comes to the specialty fields like oncology, to really weave the patient journey and understand when the patient might switch from one line of therapy to the other.
Got it. And Subhro, how do you think servicing or building solutions for a specialty business is different from traditional prescription drugs?
Thanks, Sean. Again, a great question. If I look at the traditional businesses, markets that we have had, I look at it more like a machine gun. You take one drug and pump it into the market on whatever for diabetes, for cholesterol, and hope it works. But as we have moved as an industry, the industry itself has moved. away from, I would say, easy to solve diseases to more difficult to solve diseases, the targeting of that product has become very different. It's almost at point in time getting to one-to-one mapping, right? If you look at precision medicine or immunotherapy, which is emerging in oncology space, it's becoming almost one-to-one, where it's a very small segment of population to which the medicine is targeted. For that, you need a whole different way of targeting that population, be it from identification to marketing, which I talked about earlier. So the whole methodology that you will use to get to that population base is very different from what we have seen in the traditional space, which is fundamentally the reason why we built up this CIP platform, so that you have that ability to not only look at it from an internal pharma perspective, but also take the patient view and say, how do I create an outreach to the patient population which I need to address? So it's a whole, so I think the new era of precision medicine that's coming in, it will be completely digital enablement. And maybe at some point in time, the digital enablement will become much more than the product itself in a very different way if you look at it. But that will be the fundamental shift that's happening. So it's a very fundamental shift that we are seeing to move away from, as we move into the more difficult to solve diseases, that the need to have this precise way of targeting the population, precise way of reaching out to the patients is far more important. Thank you, Sean.
Got it. Thank you. Manjul, another question for you. What about using AI in training to launch new products or train medical reps?
Yeah, I was just responding to that. Yeah, that's a great thought, and I think there is some level of experimentation going on that front. But when it comes to training medical reps, right? So that content that you go through is highly controlled. So there is compliance and regulatory implications to that. So that process in terms of how you weave in AI into that is where I see there is an opportunity is now reps, as I mentioned earlier, that more and more that in-person window is closing. So whenever they engage with HCPs would engage with reps, they're coming back with asking for very precise information. That's where if you have some of your learnings around what content typically reps ask for, and that is already sort of MLR kind of certified, then AI can help in picking based on what is happening. AI can help in picking which content to serve either via the rep or to the HCP digitally.
Great. And another question for you, Manjul. What are the personas, who you think will require access to data during the time that you're preparing for your brand launch?
Oh yeah, so on the business side, so all the folks, let's say your commercial data stewards, right, folks in the sales ops, data science is a big one. So they are heavy users of data, field force liaisons in a home office. And so they are initially involved. And market research is another big one, who are heavy users of data, and then they influence the strategy in terms of brand or sales strategy pair. So those are the kind of personas who would need early access to data.
Okay, and Subhro, question for you. What do customers expect from platform solutions? Does this mean a one-size-fits-all?
I think, Sean, the answer is no. One-size-fits-all would be a really bad, first of all, a bad strategy from our company perspective. We cannot do that. I think every company is unique, every customer's needs are unique, every patient needs is unique. But at the same time, what we have to find is a happy normal between the extent of customization we want to push into the let's say IT platforms that we are creating versus the level of templatization, standardization that we need to have. And I have a feeling that over the longer term, if you look at the IT landscape in the pharma industry, it has learned the hard way that the customization costs you much more, and it builds in inefficiencies that ultimately become more than the business benefit that you get. So today's customers, I think, are much more open to looking at platforms with a minimal amount of customization that they want to push into the system. So the way we also have built our solution, which as I mentioned early on, is that we have made it a little bit more modular so that the extent of customization is inherent to the platform, rather than we then having to completely redo the whole thing from a customer to customer perspective, then it no longer remains a platform, it becomes a custom implementation for a client. So I think if I have to take a guess, I would say it's an 80-20 rule. 80% standard and maybe 20% customization is what should serve the needs of the people or the needs of our clients as they look at it.
Got it. Thank you. And we are out of time for our session today. I want to thank all three of our speakers for joining us. Thank you to Infosys for making our session possible today. Just a reminder, the webinar has been recorded. You'll receive an email with a link to the video so that you can view it again. And to access additional webinars or get info on how your organization can speak or sponsor, please visit wcwebed.com. Thanks again for joining us, everyone. Have a great day. And this
Thank you.
concludes today's discussion.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye now.